Hi, this is Neve from Be Coaching Solutions, and we're here for session 3 out of the 6-part series on burnout. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my very good friend, Frances Jones from Francesjonesnutrition.ie. And Frances is qualified in so many different things. She's an incredible woman, an inspiration. She is a coach. She is a nutritionist. She originally had her business on Image Matters, and an artist to boot as well. But really her focus is on marrying the coaching and the nutrition. And so, Frances, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you. And I know I should probably say that you are specializing in women's health. But of course, when we're talking about burnout today, all is welcome. And the point you're going to take us through and the steps you're going to offer are available to man, woman, and child, probably, I'd imagine, when it comes to nutrition.
Oh, totally, Neve. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to be part of your series. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thanks.
So I know, Frances, when you and I have been talking about burnout in the past, you've had lots of different clients show up in different guises through the years, probably, and help them through that. And so maybe you'll share some of your experiences in terms of, you know, what burnout looks like for your clients, how it's shown up, and we'll talk about maybe a little bit how you've helped them through it, but maybe start with how it has shown up to you and what you were able to do.
I suppose I'm lucky that I didn't really suffer from burnout myself, but as you say, in my business over the years, working with corporate women primarily, so often dealing with women who were just exhausted, really stressed, burning the candle at every end, trying to juggle careers, families, children, maybe aging parents, and often reaching, you know, or trying to reach the pinnacle of their career, and really just absolutely, I mean, burnt out was there's no other word for it. But they just often felt that this was normal. This was the way it was. I came across one evening, I was doing an image session a few years ago now in a bank, which shall remain nameless, and I was dealing with these executive women. They did, in fairness, they did a lot of travel, and one lady came in. She was a little bit late, and you know, she was a bit disheveled. She was clearly exhausted. You know, phone, big bag, iPad, the lot, and so we were going through the meeting anyway, and she was like this. You know, she was kind of nodding off a bit. I felt sorry for her because, you know, it was an interesting subject, not because it was me presenting, but it was about image and how they could, you know, use this to help them further their career. And I said to her at one stage, I said, "Are you okay?" You know, and she said, "I'm really tired." She said, "I'm exhausted." She said, "I haven't slept since the twins were born." And I said, "Oh yeah, look, I completely understand. That is really understandable." I said, "What age are they?" She said 17. I went, okay. I mean, you couldn't make that up, really. So there is a woman, and I mean, that was a fairly extreme example, but so many women like that, and maybe with symptoms, Neve. I mean, I always say the body never lies. So I always say to people, men and women, if you're having symptoms like digestive issues, maybe you've got reflux or bloating or indigestion or maybe constipation or diarrhea or a combination of both, which is, you know, it's not a good sign. You need to pay attention, because they say all disease starts in the gut. And really, now other people who are suffering extreme stress can obviously suffer things like maybe migraines, headaches. I mean, they're popping the old painkillers there, but maybe then there's a painkiller every day, or they're taking stuff to sleep or stuff to help them get going in the mornings. So it manifests itself in many, many different ways.
Like the prolonged version, Frances, isn't it really? You know, the odd headache here and there, or the odd feeling a bit bloated here and there. People probably wouldn't take too much notice of that, and that might be normal course of life. It's when it's prolonged or it's happening quite frequently, I would think that that's where maybe the difference comes from. Is that fair to say, or what's your experience?
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's a build-up. And, you know, and often women say, and men too say, you know, I used to be able to juggle, I used to be able to do so many things. Nothing bothered me. I could really take everything in my stride. And then over a kind of a period of time, little things begin to kind of really get on top of them, or they just feel they're on the back foot all the time, they're under pressure. And I suppose, you know, you throw a pandemic into all of that, then you have working from home, maybe homeschooling, the stress with families and maybe elderly parents or whatever, and you put all of that in, and on the uncertainty and maybe working from home, all the boundaries are blurred
or gone.
Or gone. I mean, you know from your business with coaching, I mean, it's just really, really difficult to kind of set those boundaries and respect those boundaries. And all of a sudden, you know, everything is coming at you, and you just really feeling. And there are different stages of burnout, Niamh. You know, it's a well-known, established phenomenon whereby we have what we call the alarm stage, and that's where we have what we call increased sympathetic nervous system activity. So that's when we're in our fight or flight, which I'm sure you and your viewers have heard of. So fight or flight is when we're like when we were in our hunter-gatherer times, when we were, you know, the big bear was coming and we were all spurred for action. And, you know, we get this cortisol hit. That's a brilliant thing to have. And, you know, we're in survival mode. And then, you know, we're back then to, you know, the crisis is over, back to normal. And then, but then, you know, what's happening nowadays is that we're kind of in that state all the time. And then the next stage of the burnout are this really increased levels of stress, whereby like you're tired but wired. So you cannot really relax. You can't really sleep very well. You wake up in the morning and it's gone zoom, it's go. And we're in that what we call adaptation phase. So we still have this high. So it's not just a spiking of cortisol. It's kind of like an increased nervous system activity the entire time. And what happens then is over a period of time is it's called adrenal fatigue. It's a bit more complex than that, because it's what we call our HPA axis, our hypothalamus, which is our signaling system in the body for our nervous system, our pituitary gland, but then our adrenals, which are our adrenal glands, which are just sitting on top of our kidneys, which release this cortisol, and they just get literally burnt out. They're pumping out this cortisol, which has it's a brilliant thing. It's a brilliant hormone, but not when it's elevated the entire time. It has a very negative impact on the body at a number of levels.
Gotcha. So just so that we're clear, so cortisol is so necessary some of the time, particularly in that fight or flight mode, or we're put into fight or flight mode where cortisol is released, the stress hormone, and it serves a purpose and is so important to keep us safe at points in time.
Exactly.
But then what's so important is that rest period happens, the cortisol levels go back to normal, and we can resume, I suppose, a healthy state.
Exactly. So that kind of coming back down is what we call our parasympathetic system, or what we call our rest and digest system. And that's kind of, the body loves to be in that state. But and I suppose on a daily basis, when we wake up in the morning, our cortisol is high, and it should be high in the morning. And then as the day goes on, it just comes down, 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 down in the evening, to allow other hormones like our melatonin to come up to help us to sleep. But if we are in that state of exhaustion, instead of the cortisol being here and coming down, the cortisol is literally in its boots. So that's why people can't, you know, they've hit the snooze button about 20 times. They cannot get out of the bed. No matter how reasonable a good sleep they've had, they still feel exhausted. And they're literally, it's a physiological reality. They are literally burnt out. Their adrenals are just said, I've had enough. I've had this. And then you throw other hormones into the mix as well, which are once one or two are dysregulated, everything is dysregulated.
Cocktail, really, isn't it?
Completely.
And it's so true. How many times have you woken up in the morning? It's like, I felt like I haven't gone to sleep at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can.
So no matter how good a sleep you think you've had, it's not what we call restorative sleep. Like ideally in the morning, you should be waking up saying, yeah, I'm ready to take on the day. But you have this what we call low cortisol. And really, there's just, no matter what you do, what some people do is then they resort to things like caffeine, which is a stimulant, which is, yeah, I mean, loads of people do, but it's probably the last thing we should be doing, because, as I say, it's a stimulant and it increases the stress response.
Okay.
So yeah, so I can understand, I absolutely get it, but it's just probably not the best thing to be doing, certainly first thing in the morning. And then people are on the kind of keeping the coffee going all day, or the tea perhaps, depending on what they're doing.
So Frances, if we were to take, say, a typical day, so someone wakes up in the morning, they're not feeling refreshed, probably because their cortisol levels are not at the right level. So maybe talk us through a day that somebody could start to implement where it's better for them in terms of if they're experiencing burnout symptoms, these steps could help relieve some of them. So if you talk me through the morning when they get up to when they go to bed.
If somebody has what we call a low cortisol, if they're they're feeling in that burnt out state.
From a nutritional perspective, what do you think they could do that's going to help them rather than reaching for the coffee, which is invariably what could they do?
What could they do? So I mentioned there, I'm going to just take a little pre-step back before I answer that. The other problem is when we have dysregulated, which is, it's cortisol is all over the place, but generally it's low. We then have issues with insulin because when we are in that fight or flight mode, think back to the hunter-gatherer has to run from that bear or that lion or whatever. What happens in the body is that all of the adrenaline and cortisol is pushed into the extremities because they've got to go, they've got to run. And what happens then, we have a flood of glucose into the big muscles. So glucose is like the sugar in our system, in our bodies. And then we have to kind of regulate the glucose in our bodies, we have insulin is released by the pancreas. And we have then this kind of roller coaster of insulin, our insulin drops, our cortisol comes in to kind of get us going again. So one of the things that spikes insulin is a lot of sugar in the body. So to kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, what not to do in the mornings would be to have any kind of sugary foods, which are going to stimulate that insulin hit or insulin release. So things like fresh orange juice or cereals, which are kind of a high sugar, or white toast with marmalade, or and a coffee or something like that, and maybe a banana. Banana is a good food, is a good natural food. But I would be suggesting, and in fact, what happens is many times people, because they're a bit kind of dysregulated with their hormones, they don't often feel hungry in the morning, so they'll just have a coffee and go. So what I often say to clients is, if you're not feeling hungry in the morning, maybe have a smoothie or a juice. Now, often people say, I don't have time for that. But I say, look, put it in the fridge, prepare it the night before, and just whiz it up in the mornings and have it on the go if you need to. But definitely, and always include some protein in that. So that would be something like some nuts and seeds, rather than just having what we call simple carbohydrates, which is what's going to spike our sugar and our insulin levels. So things that are going to blunt that kind of spike are things like nuts and seeds, so protein and fats, which will blunt that response. So it's more sustaining rather than having a hit. So you often find that people who have simple carbohydrates, like say the white toast and the marmalade or whatever, kind of 11 o'clock, they're kind of craving again, and they're kind of looking for a croissant and donut or scone.
So you're
or something
saying
like
that a good recommendation to help regulate the hormones in the morning particularly would be something like a fruit smoothie. You could even use frozen fruit, I'd imagine, if that was what was available, and put a bit of nuts and seeds into it, crank it up and drink it on the go, which is probably not news to most people, right? But I think what I love about this idea is it's particularly good if you're in the burnout stage or you find yourself having burnout symptoms. It's changing the diet such that you can start to regulate the hormones, because you'll start to feel a little bit better once they're managed, I would imagine. Is that kind of the thought process?
Yeah, so what you need, so what you're trying to do is kind of, instead of having this spike of insulin, it drops, cortisol kicks in to get this, you want to keep it at a kind of an even keel. So how are you going to do that? You're going to avoid what we call simple carbohydrates or simple sugars, which are all the kind of things like I mentioned, the white bread, white pasta, white rice, confectionery of all kinds, you want what we call low glycemic food. Low glycemic foods are foods that don't spike your sugar levels, and they keep you full for longer. If at all possible, if you do have a breakfast in the morning, I would be suggesting you go opt for something like eggs. You know, people say, oh, I don't have time to be doing eggs, but you might even have a hard-boiled egg and have it on a slice of brown toast or something like that. But definitely, that's going to set your kind of mood really for the day, or set the tone for the day in terms of keeping you full and to stop you snacking again, maybe on sugary foods. And again, if you are snacking, I suggest maybe go for something like some nuts or seeds or something like that, some almonds, or, you know, Brazil nuts are really full of selenium, which is great for the thyroid. So, you know, there's different ways. And again, it's just really getting into a habit of, because when we're tired or when we're exhausted, we crave carbs, we crave carbohydrates. We want this sweetie, something, I deserve it. You know, I've had hard days
to have carbs. Any reason. I'm very good at
I know justifying things. Yeah, I know. So we're all a bit like that, but that's because if you don't start off the morning with a kind of what we call a sustaining or a whole food breakfast, you're less. If you don't start off that way, you're more likely to make poor decisions as the day goes on. And if you're tired, if you're exhausted, you know, you just want something that's quick and easy. You're not going to, you know, go to starting from cooking, always cooking from scratch.
Absolutely. And so that's breakfast sorted. We've got our snacks sorted, which is pretty great. What about as we go through into the evening? What's a good idea to consider in terms of food or nutrition that's going to help us, you know, again, keep the hormones balanced, to help us with the burnout and navigate through it, but also to help us to have some sleep, because I think that's the crucial part of sleep.
Okay, so again, I'm going back to hormones again, and this is something actually, you know, this is a time when often people will lose weight when they are kind of burnt out, but for many people, particularly women, the weight goes on, particularly around the middle. I'm back to the hormones again. If you don't sleep properly, you have two hormones which regulate your appetite, ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is what's called our hunger hormone. So we don't sleep properly, our ghrelin is upregulated, so we actually feel hungry. So it's kind of not something in your head when you're not sleeping properly and you feel hungry. The science is there to show us that this ghrelin is upregulated when you don't sleep properly, so you feel hungrier. And on the other side of that, then we have leptin, which is our satiety hormone. So it's kind of downregulated. So that's kind of the hormone that's there to tell you you've had enough to eat, you don't need to eat anymore. So that's downregulated. So when that's downregulated, you tend to eat more. So that's a roundabout way of saying, try and, you know, not eat too late in the evening, but try and have always, with every meal, I would say you need to have a protein, a good quality fat, and the carbs kind of look after themselves. I would say stay away from, as I said, the simple carbohydrates, the white rice, the white pasta, all of that, and go for whole wheat pasta or whole grain rice. I would suggest maybe have some fish or some good quality poultry or red meat, you know, a couple of times a week if that's what you fancy. But always load up on your veggies, what I call your DGLVs, your dark green leafy veg. Honestly, Niamh, if we were always told, I don't know whether you were told when we were kids to eat our veg, particularly our green veg. If we knew how much goodness is in green veg, I tell you, we'd be loading up on them all the time. There are so many compounds in green vegetables, particularly the leafy greens, that are so good for our nervous system and all our systems, really. We shouldn't go a day without having them.
Absolutely. I read recently that broccoli helps prevent cancer. My brain was blown away by the article. I don't remember where I read it, and I was like, broccoli helps prevent cancer, certain cancers, I'd imagine. And, you know, I think that the trouble, if that's the right word, Frances, is like you say, when you're in burnout and you're overwhelmed and everything feels, you know, potentially for some out of control, the carbs and the sweeties are what people want to go for. I know for me, it's pasta and wine. That would be the two things. Like, oh, I just like that. I deserve it. I feel I've had a crappy day, not coping very well. I feel off. So it really is. Do you have any suggestions as to how we would kind of build some of this really good stuff that we know is going to help us into our that's going to help us ultimately?
You know, I think whether you're in burnout or whether you're just stressed or just life in a pandemic or working and trying to balance everything, it's planning, shopping. Planning and shopping is really, so like what I do is on a weekend, I try and plan, you know, and it's hard sometimes saying, well, what are we going to eat on Thursday or what are we going to eat on Wednesday? But I try and plan what we're going to have. I have, say, frozen veg are always there in the freezer, so we're not stuck. And we'll always have the vegetables. We have the fish that we can, you know, buy at the weekend and maybe keep in the freezer for during the week, and the meat obviously as well. The planning at the beginning, on a Saturday or a Sunday, so that you're not going to make those quick decisions. For me, one of the great things is maybe for people who have, say, a salad or something in the evening with their dinner, that they have something left over for lunchtime the next day. Soups are a great thing, like vegetable soups. Particularly, I appreciate that lots of people don't care for green veg, but like if you can put that into a nice soup, like you can have that 2 or 3 days. Topple some sprinkled pumpkin seeds or something like that. Throw in a can of chickpeas. I mean, there's great protein there. It's really filling, and you're not kind of going for the sandwich. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the sandwich, but if you don't buy the stuff, so I know if the stuff is there, we tend to eat it. So it's back to your shopping. So being a little bit disciplined with the shopping, so that you're not, you know, buying the biscuits. Oh, just have it, because we can't even use the excuse now. If somebody calls, you know, we can't use that excuse anymore. So opting for healthy.
Yeah.
Opting for healthy options when we're shopping.
Okay. So it's really about a little bit of planning, and ultimately, if you don't have to even think about it of an evening, then, and you know you're in this particular scenario of feeling burnout, we know that taking that choice away in some respects and just being able to lean for some of the good stuff is so much better for you, because ultimately it might take a couple of weeks for it to really kick in. I don't know, you can tell us, but eventually it's going to pay off. The wise choices are going to help you to start to feel better, and your body start to feel better, and some of the symptoms of burnout would be eased in some respects, I'd imagine. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Honestly, Niamh, it's amazing how many of us don't realize that what we put in here determines how we feel in here or in our bodies. So an implemented kind of, and I won't say a regime, but a routine of, you know, good nutrition and good lifestyle approaches is such a powerful way to reduce stress. And because stress is really a precursor for many chronic diseases. I mean, if you spend a lot of time, or anyone spends a lot of time in that, you know, elevated cortisol, it has terrible impact really for our cardiovascular health, for things like diabetes, for autoimmune disease. As I said earlier, all disease starts in the gut. We really need to be putting the good things in. So you were asking there about what to eat. We need to eat also what I would call tryptophan-rich foods. Tryptophan is a compound which is a precursor for serotonin, which is our happy hormone, which is primarily made in the gut. So tryptophan-rich foods would include things like poultry, good quality poultry, eggs, nuts and seeds, foods that are going to, you know, sustain us, get our serotonin levels up, keep us feeling better, a precursor to melatonin. Serotonin is a precursor to melatonin, which is our sleep hormone, which when our cortisol is going down in the evenings, our melatonin is going up. And we need that to have a good quality sleep. Does that answer your question? Sorry, roundabout way.
It does, thank you. And what we might do is just focus for a couple of minutes on the sleep part then, because I think when you and I were talking about it before, we were saying, you know, a good sleep is a solution for 99% of the world's ills, I think. And we know, you know, we have a lot of new mums where it's naturally, and new parents, I should say, where the sleep is naturally going to be interrupted. But again, for people who have prolonged stress or feeling like they're burnt out, sleep can be really something that's dramatically affected. And so then it becomes this bit of a spiral. Like you say, the hormones are unbalanced as a result. So maybe you talk to us about really trying to get the best sleep that you can.
Oh my God, aren't we all after that? So if somebody says to me, no, listen, I'm fine, I manage really well on 6 hours sleep, I'm kind of saying, no. It's, again, the studies are there. You know, we need a good 7, 8, 9 hours is really, like, I don't know, but I certainly say aim for 8 hours. So we need to prioritize sleep. So what does that mean? It's different things. And as you say, for new parents, with young children and that, it's just that time in life when, you know, the little ones obviously need to be looked after, and they're a priority. So the main thing I come across really is the phones and the screens. So I mentioned the melatonin there earlier on. The melatonin is kind of, it starts to increase during the night as things get dark. But if we're on screens half the night or half the evening, and we have this blue light, it's very stimulating, and it's suppressing the production of melatonin. You will not have a good sleep if you have the screen. So I suggest is, and this is something for everybody to try, is can you pull back and can you reduce that screen usage to an hour or minimum, maybe 2 hours before bedtime. Now some people kind of go, oh my God, never do that. Or the other thing I find is men and women with their partners, they get off their phone, but their partners are on the phone or the iPad or whatever. So there has to be a little bit of negotiation there, but cutting the screen time is a really crucial part of getting a good night's sleep.
Okay.
Put the phone on air. Sorry
for interrupting, Frances. Does that include TV as well as being on the phone or your iPad?
Yeah, it's just that brightness. If you think again, our ancestors, all they had was, well, they had probably a fire, you know, in the outdoors, but generally overall it was dark. And that just leads me to another point. When we start talking about sleep, I always say when you start wanting to think about your sleep, think about what you're doing in the daytime. So you need to get out early in the morning to get brightness, to get sunlight. Again, it's to stimulate your pineal gland, which is the producer of the serotonin as well. And also, of course, our vitamin D, which is a whole other story. But brightness early in the day. And if you are, I know for people who suffer with sleep deprivation or insomnia, or what they call sleep onset, they can't fall asleep in the evening, in the nighttime, or then sleep disruption where they wake up during the night. And often the time you wake up at during the night can, back in Chinese traditional medicine, traditional Chinese medicine is related back to different organs in the body, but again, a whole different story. To try and not get anxious about it, because, you know, I'm saying you should really try and get your 8 hours, but we can survive on less, but not on a long-term basis. I mean, everybody has the odd night or two when they get a poor night's sleep, and they can function reasonably well the next day. But if it's something that's happening on an ongoing basis, that is not good. So, for instance, maybe if you have a bath in your house, to have an Epsom salt bath. So Epsom salts are magnesium, really relaxing for the body. Now, I know many people don't have a bath in their house, so maybe a foot bath, and just lash in your Epsom salts into that, like the soles of your feet, it can absorb the magnesium through into the body, and really, really fabulous way. And maybe a few drops of lavender, which is an essential oil, maybe a few drops under your pillow. I used to always use that when my lads, when they were kids, they loved their lavender under their pillow. All of those little things will be different for everybody. And the other thing, we've mentioned it there, the alcohol. You know, a glass of wine at the end of the day or whatever. Like, alcohol is a depressant, but it also is a really sleep disruptor. It's just going to, again, obviously it's a toxin for the body. So what people often find is, they'll go off to sleep, but then they're wide awake at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. So the the alcohol is it's affecting the temperature in the body, it's affecting the nerves, as I say, it's depressant. And avoid eating late at night. That's also another thing. So a lot of people like to snack at night. Now, again, you want to have your digestive system resting. You don't want it to be, working as when you're sleeping, because when you're sleeping, you really want your body to be at complete rest. So the general advice, again, this is general, it's different. Other people say, no, I'm actually good with a snack, but in general, I would say avoid eating late at night, particularly kind of sweety stuff. And of course, that's when we tend to have, the glass of wine and some nice chocolate or something like that. Like dark chocolate, a couple of squares of dark chocolate, fantastic, full of antioxidants, really good for us, but not kind of our regular, lovely, whatever, chocolate. Yeah. And the other point about sleep is to get some regular exercise. Now, again, people who are in this burnout, they're either unable to do any exercise at all, or they're really pushing it. So they're pushing the running, they're pushing the gym, they're push. And I even know sometimes the way clients are talking to me, I know by them, I'm really going for it.
It's like I'll sweat the burnout out of me.
Yeah, exactly. We need to, if we have those high cortisol levels, we're designed to kind of fight or flight, literally fly away or run away, but not when you are exhausted. The last thing we need to be doing is pushing the body. So I would say have moderate exercise. So that could be, what they call forest bathing now. I don't know whether you've heard of it or not, but it's going out in nature. It's going out in green and surrounding yourself. It's maybe your local park. It may be your back garden. It may be your balcony. It may be having a couple of plants even in your living space to kind of help us kind of connect with nature. But this business of running and pushing and going and working out, I mean, I love a workout, but if I'm tired, I stop.
Yeah,
I don't do it.
I had Lisa Hughes on last week, and she was specifically talking about movement and mindfulness, and one of her tips was around movement, but for fun. Just do it for fun. It doesn't matter what the movement is, doesn't matter what the exercise is, so long as it's for fun, not to necessarily burn calories or whatever. Just get out and enjoy it and bathe in nature, as they say, etc. So in the interest of time, if we could maybe sum up with what are your 2 practical actionable steps that people could take away from a nutritional perspective that you believe is really going to help them if they're experiencing burnout?
The first thing I'd say is to address the source of your stress. And really, it's different for everybody, but just really start to notice what's really stressing you and bring your attention back to your breath. It's a really thing to do very quickly. I remember saying this to somebody a few months ago, just, I haven't time to be breathing like that. If you find yourself saying that, you definitely need it, So it's taking a really deep breath right down into your belly, really deep breath. Counting in for a count of 4, and as you're exhaling, counting out for a count of 7 or 8. It doesn't really matter with the counts. It just matters that your exhalation is longer than your inhalation. So that automatically signals to the nervous system, it's okay, we're in a safe space here, and we get into that rest and digest system. It's a brilliant thing to do anytime. I do it sometimes at a traffic light, you're in a queue, if you're just like, take a breath, and even out through the mouth is a really great de-stressor. So that would be the main thing, the breath, and it brings us back into the present moment. We're not worried about what happened yesterday or fretting about what's happening in the future. It just brings us back here into the present moment. As regards the nutrition, I mean, there's just so many things you can do. I would say cut out the sweet and the processed foods as much as you can, and opt for whole foods like fruit and vegetables more so than fruit. Just even if that means an extra apple a day, cutting out the biscuit, a few extra nuts, it's the little changes that you make that will have a big impact.